Today's guest is Doug Yates. He's a consultant and advisor for intelligent information management at Konica Minolta Business Solutions, focused on DocPoint Solutions. And for those who don't know DocPoint, it's a well-known brand in the Microsoft space. And Doug and I actually ran into each other recently at a Microsoft conference. So thanks for joining me today, Doug.
Yes, thank you, Jeremy.
So for those who haven't met you, got to know you a little bit, talk about your background. Talk about where you're from, who you are, and what you do.
So I'm originally from Pennsylvania. I was born in Harrisburg, and maybe a little unique in the fact that I was born in the city, if you call Harrisburg a city, but my mother's side of the family were Pennsylvania Dutch, so pure country. And I remember way back when I was younger with them doing the butchering and getting the big kettle out and doing scrapple and homemade sausage and all of that. But I was, I guess, fortunate enough, I was young enough that I more remember most of those things and didn't necessarily being involved in it. So that's kind of my background as far as when I was younger. And then when my first job that I participated in was actually working at UPS part-time when I went to technical school, and where I had to load one box every 3 seconds, backfill left to right, and run to the water fountain, run to the bathroom. And that's when I realized that I didn't necessarily want to do that the rest of my life. So that gave me some interesting insight and perspective.
So you mentioned technical school. Is that what you did out of high school? You chose a technical school?
I did. I had a unique scenario where I was, went to a private school, and I think I was a challenge. So they kind of gave me an ultimatum to either leave early with a plan or not. So I actually started technical school at 16 and had an associate degree at 17 and not quite sure what to do with my life. And I picked electronics because I truly didn't know what I was going to do. I just picked a broad category and hope for the best. And then the challenge back then was just trying to find something in your industry, right? I had other people, friends that were in construction, were making fairly good money, and I was struggling to find something that just barely paid anything, and it was aligned. So I hate to say it, but my very first real job that I even thought was remotely aligned, you'll think this is interesting. It was working on typewriters and calculators for about 6 months. I did rotate tape, and tilt tapes on IBM Selectrics and clean them and realized this is not going to last long at all. And in about 6 months, I had started looking in a newspaper, because it was newspaper back then, about some company called OSE that I never heard of, about working on copiers. And so I ended up somehow getting a role there as a copier technician, and that took me down this multifunctional product type of path. But back in the day, it was truly a copier, and they were big, large, 800-pound plus type of units. And I did that for a few years, and then got a call from a recruiter, asked me if I wanted to work at for a Kyocera Mita, doing a regional role, supporting dealers that would have challenges fixing their devices. So I ran across to Pennsylvania and Western New York, helping grade service departments, measure service departments on how they were operating, and they would get discounts on parts and things if they got good grades. So that it was in their best interest to pass the inspections, and I'd help them, figure out how to run a service department. So that was kind of how I got started early in my career, if you want to call it back, that back then.
No, that's very interesting and fascinating, because for those, a lot of people don't have that experience. I have met a few people who came up through kind of the copier world. Xerox is one, right? It's a big company that had a lot of stuff going on in that space. What was the career path then for you? Like you went from the technician part to this kind of regional. Where would you go next with that kind of job?
So for me, it was a little odd because from that point, from OSE on, every job I was essentially recruited from the last one. So there was not necessarily any strategy. I was probably inherently loyal and just thinking I would like to work here for a while. And so I next got pulled over to Sharp from one of my former coworkers. He asked if I would like to come over as a digital business manager. And I'm like, what the heck is a digital business manager? Well, it's like a half sales, half technology person. And we're going to help train the sales department on how to use these new digital copiers. And so, I got to learn about Ethernet cables and Novell networks back in the day, 10 base T and, those kind of scenarios. And we would, what is a print driver? What is it was pretty basic back. Keep in mind, a lot of these people just sold copiers forever. And I was the person in charge of helping them convert to the digital space. And I did that for about 2 years. And I recognized that there was an opportunity to be the regional sales manager supporting the dealer community in the Mid-Atlantic. And so that's, next thing you know, I'm a regional sales manager supporting the dealers in the Mid-Atlantic. And I did that for about 15 years.
Wow. I think we glossed over something I hadn't even thought about until, as you were saying, the digital copier versus the previous copier. Was the previous copier the liquid based?
It was not liquid, but it was analog, so it was real time. So it was a lens, that would be essentially taking a photograph onto, whatever media. So at OSE it was a long belt, but at most modern copiers were drums of some kind. Anything from very scary sounding like arsenic drums to ones that sound warm and friendly like organic, photoconductors. So it was just interesting to see that evolution.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Very similar probably to some of the early photography with the backplates.
I think so, and that probably was a little bit of an evolution for me. I had my daughter was born, and we started next trend was color. So you talked about photography, and I used it as an excuse to go all in on my color geekiness. So I bought my Nikon camera. I was not going to buy a Canon because that would have been from the competition. I learned how to use things like Photoshop and Lightroom, and tried all kinds of tools before that. How to do the the soft proofing, CMYK, the sRGB.
Yeah.
Because the challenge was, a lot of people were trying to emulate what they could see or what they could do from their print shop, and print technology in the commercial world was, I like to dumb it down. It's 4 crayons. It's CMYK, right? So can you color and get the color you want with 4 crayons, and it has to be these 4 crayons. So it was, and it was fun interacting with customers, because sometimes they would say, well, we're very picky and we want the very best quality. Describe how your copier is better than somebody else's. And I'm like, well, how picky are you? According to Adobe, do you synchronize your monitors? Do you have your lighting set up correctly? Are you sharing the same CMYK gamut? And they're like, oh, no, we're not that picky. I'm like, okay, I just want to understand what we're talking about, as you're trying to pressure me in terms of whether we can meet your expectations.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. When my wife also took up photography some time ago, and that's what I did for her. I went and got her the true color monitor that would reflect the actual colors that the way it's going to print, right? Because it is so different to see something on a screen and then print medium. And there's a lot of things that go into print medium. The paper can be a challenge, right? Much less the inks. And so, yeah, we had to figure all of that out.
I don't know if you used a soft proofing feature, and I haven't for years. I've since stayed far away from it. But if you're using matte paper, the color, the color gamut that you can achieve is much less than if you're using a glossy paper. So you're compromising when you choose that look. You just can't theoretically get from here to there.
Right. That's a very interesting conversation. I didn't even know that that's the direction we would go when we started this.
Me neither.
So then from Sharp, did Minolta buy them? Konica Minolta buy them, or how did that work out?
No, are you trying to start some sort of online war?
No,
No,
no, no, no.
no, no, ironically, one of my dealers had that I've been supporting for 20 years recruited me to essentially be their VP slash what I'd call more of a general manager to run their operation for them. And that felt like a very different career path. It was something I always wanted to do, manage a team. I got to scale up an IT department that wasn't just internal facing, but was going to be more of a managed service provider for our multifunctional device customers. And then got to learn the inside and outs of running the service department from the other side. And probably one of the things that was also interesting was managing vendors from the other side. I was always a vendor that came in, and I was in charge of all external vendor management, and watching how that engagement happened from the other side of the apple. That was, to me, fascinating. And I very much enjoyed it, but it was a small business, and that has its own innate challenges. And about 6 years into that, I realized that wasn't maybe the best long-term fit for me. Of course, when I decided to go down that path, it was right in the middle of COVID, so I didn't think through my process. And ultimately, I landed here at Konica Minolta. We were unique in the fact that we were acquired by Konica Minolta as part of their intelligent information management group. And we have two different brands that we've been under for over 30 years. So Quality Associates and DocPoint. And so I didn't even realize I was necessarily being hired under Konica Minolta when I initially went for the interview. So it was very interesting. But and it's probably the biggest change for me is the fact that up until that role, everything I did was partner focused. So I would go ahead and I would do the training for the sales teams, or I would meet with the customer and say, here's, they're a great dealer. We work with them. Please take their business card, and if you need anything, let me know. But I didn't try to build any direct relationships. In fact, that would have been essentially a channel conflict. And now I'm in a role where I do the exact opposite. I'm building direct relationships and focusing on those relationships, and managing them myself. And the other probably biggest change is a federal focus within that. So even though I had federal branches that rolled up into my overall number, we always had a government person that was assigned to it. So I get to learn much more details about the GSA contracts and the timing of the fiscal and the different people that engage. And that's quite the learning curve. 3 years in, I'll admit that I'm still learning.
Well, and you're also more software now, right, than a hardware solution. Not that the hardware solutions can't work with DocPoint, but
that's what I'm most excited about. That's the really the trend I was trying to get out of. I mean, the computer industry has been wonderful for me, but at the same time, it's not necessarily the most exciting from a geek's perspective, and or from providing an overall solution. So with to give some context, with the Quality Associates side of the house was all about large scale digitization for primarily federal customers. So you've got a federal customer that says, we've got permanent records, or we've got records we need to keep, and we need to get them digitized. Traditionally, it would have been maybe driven by space, right? But now that conversation changes, where it's driven by accessibility. It's driven by business intelligence. What can you do with that information? And then DocPoint was formed out of that group to say, okay, once it's scanned in, how are you going to manage it? So it started off as SharePoint migrations, process improvement. We're an Nintex partner, so forms, dynamic forms, and workflow. I'm trying to modernize that process. So, a lot of times if you ask a customer, are you paperless? They'll say, well, yeah, we're paperless. And then I'm like, okay, not that I necessarily believe that you're perfectly there, but can you tell me if you're still emailing PDFs back and forth? Yeah. Yeah, and usually there's some admission that there's still some of that going on, because I think that's just about anywhere, unless they were a digitally born native company, right? But in a large organization, that's not the case. And then DocPoint's evolved over time. We've talked about the fact that you've met them at different things, all the way back from SharePoint Fest. I think we did EduCon, and then the TechCon, and all the variations that great group is trying to do in terms of making sure they're changing, and we're changing too. So it's really become about M365, automation, managing that collaboration with the eye on also making sure you have the security. So anyway, I realize I'm probably rambling for you a little bit there.
No, this is good. I mean, as somebody who works in the federal government, tools such as DocPoint, right? This, like you said, help you manage that content after it's been digitized. And then on top of that, we all now have requirements. NARA no longer takes records on paper. They have to be digitized anyway. And so that it makes sense that you would have large scale migrations to get from paper to electronic documents, and then challenges of what do I do now, right? So
it's funny you say that, because in some ways NARA is ahead of everybody else in terms of the policy. I just had there was a bid that I was looking at. I won't name the state, but they were asking for a company to help them digitize documents into microfilm, microfiche, and I'm thinking, are you sure? And the argument was it was going to be to save space. I'm like, well, if we provide it's not what we recommend, but an encrypted USB would solve that space issue. But so it's interesting, and I think just even the last 3 years, where we went and talked about digitization and maybe searchability, it's now, thanks to the newer technology that's available, such as AI and Copilot, it's now evolved, right? So you're like, okay, why do you want to do this process? Well, and some people might justify it from a green perspective, hybrid work. You can't access those documents. That's great. So accessibility, 508 compliance is relevant for our federal customers. But it's also a data readiness conversation. It's are you prepared for what's next? And I think the one thing that stands out to me today is everybody wants to talk about AI, right? AI this, AI that. I mean, you probably drink from a cup that says AI on it. That just knowing what your area of focus is. But I think, as much as exciting as that is, I think there's risk that people are rushing to solve something before they prepared for it. So I'm using a bad analogy, but I think of, everyone knows when you painting a room is the most exciting part of it. You get to see the new color. But as my wife would remind me, half the effort is preparing the room for paint. And it's a pretty big effort. So I think a lot of what we do is we really lay the groundwork for preparing the room for paint. Is your data all in one place? Is there metadata attached to it? Is it been aggregated? Do you have the permissions? You can't do some sort of AI search on, the private large language models is really the big change, right? For I think for business and for agencies. And you can't do that kind of searching and risk having someone find these links that were shared, these private links that were shared with people. It wasn't a risk because nobody knew it existed. Well, the AI can crawl that without even trying. I mean, it's going to do that naturally. So you've really got to have your permissions nailed down. And on the flip side, even what I described to you, how we have two different organizations within a larger organization, when I look for past performance, or I look to say, hey, have we done anything with this agency? it doesn't always come back with the perfect answer. It's not all it's not all aggregated. I might have to look under three different search criteria under three different categories. And so to build out that AI properly, you need to make sure it's going to find everything. And then there's the associated stuff with it, right? Is your dashboards accurate? Is your Power BI, is it biased or inaccurate, however you want to frame that. But if you're only looking at partial data, is it really data?
Right.
Is there really value in that data? And then finally, you can't automate information that doesn't have the associated metadata. You certainly can't automate things that are still in a file cabinet, and you can't automate something that's in a file share on someone's PC.
That's so true.
I'm sorry, I'll clarify that you don't know about.
Right. No, that's so true. That is so true. Yeah. Because if all you did was convert it to a PDF, did you really make it? It's not really data yet, right? It's just another file in a different kind of file drawer.
Yeah, absolutely.
So interesting. And you're right. AI is going to change everything. Many organizations, government and otherwise, have learned where their permission sets are bad because people found stuff they didn't expect to find. And I think that as these tools get smarter and smarter, people get better at querying in whatever way. It continues to disclose our data governance missteps, if you will, along the way. And so having good information management is absolutely critical to fully leveraging AI in a way that's not a risk to the organization.
Well, I think what really is interesting, because a few people were challenging me on the other side, right? You'd have people ask about AI maybe a few years ago, and I remember way back when they told us our hotline was managed by AI 20 years ago. So I'm like, okay, I've heard this term before, but when Copilot really pushed it out as a private large language model, it was no longer the cool thing to search with, but it was something that was using your data to empower you. That's when I knew it was very relevant for us, and I knew it was relevant for the organizations that would participate.
Yeah.
And I don't know what your thought is, but we've had conversations about whether people are even willing to pay the cost of something like Copilot. And I'm not there to make that decision for them. I'm not sure if I would or not. And hopefully Microsoft's not listening to this. I'm just not sure, right? It's a big ask. But I think anyone that's involved in managing data, they have to realize that we're at a turning point where you at least need to prepare for whatever potential large language model you're going to use.
Yeah.
Because if you don't, you're hampering your organization. You're not leveraging that information for business intelligence.
Totally agree. I think information managers and data scientists are the wave of the future, right? That are going to help us solve that problem and figure out how to hopefully at scale get our data ready for the large language models change everything. And I always think it's funny that when they were doing AI development and they brought out this concept of a large language model, they never expected it to do what it actually did. It was kind of as economies of scale beyond what they thought the next scale was. Mm-hmm. And I think that helps to explain why we're all caught off guard from our data perspective. Right. We've had AI, machine learning around for a long time, and we've pointed them at very specific data sets, very specific use cases. But the large language model has such a capability that's never been seen before. And we're just not ready for it on the data side. And so organizations are scrambling. I agree with you. Their organizations are going to have to decide when do I want to purchase Copilot? Am I ready for it? I don't want to pay for it until I'm ready for it, because that's just a sunk cost for no good reason. And or bringing other purpose-driven LLMs, right? Because now that they're a thing, other companies will create some that are purpose-driven. Like my organization is got a legal focus. There's a lot of lawyers, but we also have a lot of accountants, and maybe there are opportunities to bring in LLMs that are trained in that scope of work. Kind of like when CRMs first came out and ERP systems first came out, and they were targeted at the manufacturing world or the supply side, logistics, and they had modules for each of those purpose areas. I gotta imagine LLMs will do something similar.
Yeah, I think it's inevitable that no one's going to let one company capture all the revenue in this
Of
space,
course.
right? So I think Copilot's certainly going to be a winner, a key player, but they're not going to be the only player
Right.
on private large language models. And I think that's where the argument, is the foundation is laid. How are you going to? What data do you have that's beneficial? And think about that. There's some data that you have that's compliance related. Okay, that's great. And then there's other data that's beneficial that has nothing to do with compliance. Um, the one that it's probably not the perfect scenario, but it comes to mind for me. Even what's going on in Israel today. Irregardless of what your thoughts are of how it should be going, the people that are involved in those decisions and making those policies in terms of supporting that effort, none of those people were there for any of the previous um, engagements.
Right.
And some of that information they may, if they're changing precedent or they're changing how they're doing things, and everything's sensitive, right? I mean sensitive in terms of how you if you're going to make a change, you better know why you're making that change.
Right.
And so who was around in 1949 that can say what are the changes that we're potentially implementing that are going to impact, and how's that going to impact us? Can you give me a quick summary of what the risks are?
Hmm.
Can you give me access to that data? So I think that's just an example of something that might be 30, 40 years old or beyond that actually has value today in a business intelligence scenario.
That brings up an interesting point. Most federal agencies, we have this mandate, of course, to maintain records, and there's different record schedules that have different periods of time. And then in the past, at least, certainly organizations I've worked in the past, when you reach that time, you archived it. Well, with large language models, do you want to do that? You raise a really interesting point that if you don't, you may still need, you may still want that data accessible so that analysis and strategic thinking can be put against it with an AI engine to better inform and better kind of fill out the decisions you're making today from something that happened, like you said, 4 decades ago.
Absolutely. I think there's two scenarios that come to mind. One selfishly, I think I shared with you how we go under two different brands, and I've been with the group for about 3 years now. So I'm pleasantly surprised our reputation and how many different organizations we've done business with, but I often don't know about that when I initially engage.
Right.
So I'm like, wow, I didn't know we did stuff with them before. And I'd love to be able to easily search that information. And I don't want to know what happened within the compliance period. I want to know, have we ever done anything with this agency? Over the last, since we've been in existence, that's important to know. If we've done 3 different projects for your agency, even if it's been an extended period of time, I think that just shows credibility. We've been around and we're here, right? The other customer I'm working with, I think they're responsible for geology, right? So basically keeping track of mining data, who owns that data, what type of materials are in those mines since the beginning of time, and so from a compliance perspective, I don't think they have any obligation. No one says you have to keep that forever, right. But what was kind of a boring industry, don't tell them I said that. I like rocks and all that, but now all of a sudden it's a global competitive knowledge about where's the resources for EVs. Where's do we have all the stuff we need? We've seen that in competing against China. Well, they've got most of this, or they've already locked this down, and so this is important information for us to be aware of.
Wow, so much to think about there, right? Data, once again, data as a strategic asset, and these tools and managing your content in the appropriate way will help empower agencies to do it correctly. So Doug, you've had a distinguished career, longish career.
Mhm.
When you look back over your experience, what's something that you go, man, I wish we did that differently. I wish that there was some improvement or efficiency that can be brought to whatever this topic might be for you, or multiple topics. And now caveat that to say, um, you and I don't have to help figure out what that efficiency gain, how to achieve that efficiency or improvement, but just get the conversation started. What might be something you would bring up?
Well, it's interesting, you and I had a little bit of a pre-conversation, so I think there's, that's always adds an element of interest, right? But the one thing, you had mentioned to me that you do mentoring and help people with career advice. And my daughter's in school at Towson right now. She's going for nursing. So at least, she may have to figure out what version of nursing, but she's got some sort of path, kind of outlined. But I think the one thing that most students don't understand is most of the interesting jobs no one knows anything about.
Mm.
And most of the ones that sound interesting are boring. And they're not what they're cracked up to be. You have to think about what the role actually feels like doing it. I kind of the analogy I've used is one of my former neighbors. I used to say would sell toilet paper rolls, and he didn't really do that. He worked for a paper company, but but if you framed it that he sold toilet paper rolls, nobody's going to clamor for that job. But he was a regional manager that went to different companies and traveled and engaged and had a good career and enjoyed it. So that could be much different than someone that sits behind a computer the whole time that's not necessarily doing something interesting, right? It might be important, but if it's not interesting, you could die of boredom pretty quickly.
So,
So I
yeah,
think,
that raises an interesting point. I do a lot of I mentor interns when they come into different organizations I've worked for, and I love it. Like this past cycle, I had an intern come in, and I said, "Well, what are you studying?" He said, "Well, I'm trying to get into cyber." I said, "Do you know what you want to do?" And he had no idea what he wanted to do. And I said, "Okay, no big deal. I'm going to set up meetings with people in our organization who do cyber in every aspect of cyber. We have 6 different branches with 6 different focus areas, whether it's, compliance and risk, or authority to operate, right? Evaluations, or engineering, right? There's so many aspects just in that cyber realm. And so I love that. I love what you're saying there is he didn't know, because he just knew that people are saying, oh no, you should get a job in cyber because there's lots of jobs, right? But
oh,
he didn't
sure.
really know what that meant, like what job there was to do.
Well, I know a little bit, maybe a little bit of a side tangent. Cyber is almost like the AI thing, right? Everybody wants to do the cool, fun stuff, so everyone's attracted to it. I get it, but not everything's external penetration testing, right?
That's right.
You've got the internal risk, and some of those internal risks are really boring. Can you imagine the agency that he's the CISO that's responsible that says I've got everything locked down, and it's fantastic, but I don't know what paper is in this room, or I don't know what file shares here, or I didn't even realize that our process that we had was so broken. It opened us up to doing it so backwards that we were blind to it. You know, sometimes there's some hard stuff and there's some interesting stuff that should be solved. It goes back to the chain's only as strong as its weakest link. So I think if I'm talking to people that are experts in cyber, I want to encourage them to really think through some of the fundamentals that are adjacent to that.
Yeah.
Do you know where your data is, and do you know what it's doing? You know,
Right. And that could be the same for many, many careers, right? You just throw something out there, whatever job title it is, and not understand, like you said, what does that job actually entail? Is it something I'm really interested in? And you're right, there's not a lot of visibility into, there's so many different positions, so many different things that you can do. And even looking at a job posting doesn't even really express what that position does. So I like your point that better education, better ways to expose people who are trying to get careers started to those opportunities. I don't hear about I don't hear about people going and speaking on what they do for a living. I remember doing that like a couple times. I volunteered to do that at, like, say, an elementary school. But you don't hear about that at colleges. You don't hear about that at technical schools. You don't hear about that at high schools, because some people go straight into some sort of job. So I think there's some opportunity there for education to expand on that sort of thing.
Yeah, and I think most of the real opportunities are by companies you never heard of.
Right.
You truly, everyone wants to go to the big company. In my area back in the day, Hershey Foods or AMP, if you remember that as a company. But now Tyco or what have you. But now, of course, Microsoft, Google, Amazon. The
Right.
FANG stocks are always at the top of the list. But it's everybody else. It's really out there. And I think at the risk of causing any sort of controversy, I think that the thing I would like to see change is the way government acquires, right? I came from the commercial space, and that is the thing that maybe surprises and disappoints me. Maybe once I have it 100% locked down, I'll say leave it the way it is because I'm the only one that understands it. But I think the methodologies for trying to do good create more compromises than necessary, right? Because everybody's a category in some way, and you're certified in some way, or you're a small business, or you this, or you that, and at the end of the day, you can't just engage in a normal, say, is this a good value? Did you check with at least two other options? Did they come up with something comparable, or are we the best fit? And did you guys agree to it? Right? That's the part that I think, and as a taxpayer, citizen, whatever you want to call it, patriot, you would like to see government figure out how not to overpay, and yet still make sure that it's not all going to large businesses.
No, that's a good point. As somebody who works in IT in the government, I know exactly what you're talking about. And the challenges are huge. The procurement process is convoluted and takes a lot of education to navigate it. And I've been in this space for 20 years, and I agree with you. I still learn nuances on a daily basis on how to achieve certain things and buy products. So it's got a lot of work and education
on the plus side, I've got to learn and meet many different partners and build some wonderful relationships, and that works out wonderfully when it aligns with the type of support that's required, right?
Yeah.
And in other cases, you're struggling to partner with someone on something that it doesn't make any sense to partner on. We do all three components, and we're going to fire a third of that. We're going to fire a third of those people and use you instead.
Yeah.
So I've got a pie shop that we have people that are in charge of baking. We have the people that are in charge of serving, and people in charge of cleaning. But we unfortunately got to let the cleaning people go and hire you. It's just usually when a business is built, it's built around solving a broader problem. You don't intentionally leave holes in it. And I think the government tends to force your hand to say, can you figure out a way to create a hole that you need to fill? And that makes it a little bit challenging.
It does. Well, we're not going to solve that today. What's coming up? No. What's coming up for you in the near future, Doug?
So the big push for us is really, I think, is what we've already kind of talked about, is really helping people prepare for the large language models, and being very practical about it. Modernize their data sets and think about what they're going to do with it. And it's not just for the large language model. It's not just for AI, but it's what it can do for your dashboards. It's what can you do for your automation strategy. I think that's it's a big opportunity that hasn't been totally solved yet. The Power Platform is fantastic. There's other tool sets that we work with that are fantastic, but most things aren't automated, right? And I think when we look around today, we're still doing stuff the old-fashioned way for most of our processes. It's not perfectly integrated. My calendar's not perfectly integrated. Let's try to get business to work better, agencies to work better, and most of that comes from getting your data cleaned up.
Well, Doug, I really, really appreciate this conversation. I'm glad I bumped into you at the conference, and thank you so much for joining me on the podcast today.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jeremy. Take care.